What did Jesus mean when he said to not cast your pearls before swine, as mentioned in Matthew chapter 7, verse 6? Do not cast your pearls before swine is a portion of the Sermon on the Mount. And to understand its meaning, we have to understand its context and placement within the sermon. Christ had just finished instructing the crowd on judgment and reproof. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 to 2. And you, hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Matthew chapter 7, verse 5. Then, in verse 6, Christ tempers these admonitions and shows us the difference between judgment and discernment. We are not to be hypocritical judges, yet we must be able to discern the swine, lest we cast our pearls before them. Before Jesus says, do not cast your pearls before swine, he said, do not give dogs what is sacred. An analogy mentioning dogs is also used in Proverbs. As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. Proverbs chapter 26, verse 11. A dual reference to swine and dogs is also found in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 22. Of false teachers, the proverbs are true. A dog returns to its vomit, and a sow that is washed goes back to her wallowing in the mud. This Bible verse describes people who reject Christ and return to their sins. The verse is part of a passage in which Peter warns Christians about false teachers who lead people away from a true understanding of Christ. Peter describes these teachers as lying to believers and encouraging them to indulge in sexual sin. He says that people who escape from sin and then return to it are worse off than if they had never left. These two verses are often used in conjunction to emphasize that a teacher's conduct, not just their words, determines the soundness of their teaching. This verse concludes Peter's teaching about those who had been led astray by the false teachers. He has in mind those who had come into contact with the community of Christians only to return to the sinfulness of the world. These people had apparently heard about the gospel of Jesus without genuinely placing their faith in Christ. Instead, enticed by the lies of the false teachers, they had gone back to their old place in the world among those who live only for their sinful desires. Peter writes that those who persist in continual sin embody the wisdom of Proverbs 26, verse 11. The fool returns to his folly just as a dog returns to eat his own vomit. Similarly, they are like a pig who can be scrubbed clean, but soon returns to wallow in the muck again. This is a particularly pungent analogy for Peter, as pigs and dogs were two of the most despised and unclean animals in Jewish thinking. In other words, these people were never truly changed in their nature. Dogs and pigs do what dogs and pigs do. Those truly in Christ don't merely get rid of the sin in their lives and thus become acceptable to God. Through faith and by God's power, true believers are changed in their very nature, becoming more and more like Jesus over time through the power of God at work in them. This does not mean perfection, but it does mean a changed life. Those who show evidence that they were never changed, it stands to reason, are still exactly what they used to be. In his sermon, Jesus uses dogs and pigs as representative of those who would ridicule, reject, and blaspheme the gospel once it is presented to them. We are not to expose the gospel of Jesus Christ to those who have no other purpose than to trample it and return to their own evil ways. Repeatedly sharing the gospel with someone who continually scoffs and ridicules Christ is like casting pearls before swine. We can identify such people through discernment, which is given in some measure to all Christians, as mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 15 to 16. The command not to cast your pearls before swine does not mean we refrain from preaching the gospel. Jesus himself ate with and taught sinners and tax collectors, as seen in Matthew chapter 9, verse 10. In essence, the instruction in Matthew chapter 7, verse 6 is the same that Jesus gave to his apostles when he said, "If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that home or town," as stated in Matthew chapter 10, verse 14. We are to share the gospel, But when it becomes apparent that the gospel is not welcome, we are to move on. We are responsible to share the good news. We are not responsible for people's response to the good news. Pigs don't appreciate pearls, and some people don't appreciate what Christ has done for them. Our job is not to force conversions or cram the gospel down people's throats. There's no sense in preaching the value of pearls to swine. Jesus' instruction to his apostles on how to handle rejection was to simply go elsewhere. There are other people who need to hear the gospel, and they are ready to hear it.